Hi everybody, my name is Beatriz Pomés Jiménez. I am a researcher at Instituto Cultura y Sociedad at the University of Navarra in collaboration with Museo Universidad de Navarra and founding member of the Association for Performative Studies for Arts. Today I will be presenting our research, Visuality as a Trigger in José Ortiz de Echagüe's photography here at Espacio Ortiz de Echagüe at the Museum University of Navarra.
Visuality as Creative Trigger in José Ortiz de Echagüe's photography. A research by Dr. Beatriz Pomés Jiménez, Dr. Hermans, Dr. Igor Saenz Abarzuza, and Dr. Patrick MacDevitt. Born into a military family in Guadalajara in 1886, José Ortiz de Echagüe spent his childhood and teenage years in Logroño, where his father was based. It was during this time when he received his first camera as a gift, and years later he would say, "It was a real pleasure for me to go out and look for picturesque spots in the city of my childhood and take photographs of scenes full of popular themes, which was what interested me from the beginning." This passion and curious vision are perceptible in one of his first photographs, Sermón en la Aldea, taken in 1903 in a village in La Rioja. This image was soon a highly regarded shot and is considered his first major achievement in the field of photography. In 1903, the family returned to Guadalajara, where 17-year-old Ortiz Echagüe continued the family tradition and enrolled in the Military Engineers Academy, where he graduated in June 1909 and obtained the rank of first engineer lieutenant. His first assignment took place in the summer of 1909, where he was head of the aerial photography service for the aerostation service in Melilla. During this 5-month mission in the north of Africa, he became an expert in aerial photography. He contributed with his knowledge and photographs to the elaboration of maps and sketches from the conflict zones. Back in Guadalajara, José Ortiz Echagüe continued his studies. First, as part of the balloon services, where he became responsible of the photography department, and later, as part of the first generation of military pilots in Spain, obtaining his wings in 1911. His was the 7th Spanish license issued. After a brief Argentinian stay, where he reached the rank of captain, he moved back to join his fellow pilots in Morocco, where the war situation had worsened. For the next 3 years, his military achievements were varied. But, as we have seen so far, his photographic interest and dedication accompanied him everywhere. During his spare time in military service, he captured multiple images of the reef in North Africa, such as landscape, costumes, the way of life, or the habits of the inhabitants. His photos show market scenes, figures on the narrow Moroccan streets, everyday scenes, and local arts and crafts. In other cases, he focused directly on his subjects' faces with close-ups that give these figures a monumental look. One of these pictures stands out from the rest, Moro al Viento. In this image, we can already perceive to a large extent the aesthetic and cultural criteria that would sustain the enormous photographic production that he developed for decades. In 1915, he returned to Spain. Endorsed by his experience as aircraft repairer, he joined the military base in Cuatro Vientos, where he became in charge of directing the constructions of the airplanes designed and nicknamed Los Flechas. From this moment on, he put aside his facet as pilot and focused his endeavors as businessman in the private sector, becoming a renowned entrepreneur in the design and constructions of airplanes and automobiles. In this new role, in 1923 he founded CASA, and later on he was named the first director of the newly founded SEAT. He remained ahead of both of these companies until an unusual age, at 84 and 81 years old respectively. José Ortiz Echagüe died in 1980 at 94 years of age. This long and fruitful professional career was parallel to his success as a photographer. Despite not having received any formal education, José Ortiz Echagüe became the first Spanish photographer to gain national and international recognition. His photography exemplifies the most popular and successful representation of the so-called pictorialism of Spanish photography, which is, and I quote, "nothing more than a declared submission of the photographic technique to the aesthetic principles that governed painting." These photographic techniques allude directly to Ortiz Echagüe's direct carbon printing on fresson paper method, which gave his photographs a unique and distinctive look and a deep sense of craftsmanship. To state it briefly, it is known as direct carbon procedures, those in which the image is obtained directly on the original paper, which has been previously covered in a layer of gelatin and superimposed by a layer of pigment. When exposed to the light, natural or artificial, the gelatin reacts. it remains soft in the parts of the image that received less light, but hardens in the parts of the image that received more light. Then, the copy is washed with water and sawdust to produce friction on the paper. And in this process, the soft gelatin is eliminated with the pigment, leaving that area white, while the hardened gelatin resists, trapping the pigment inside and thus producing black areas. This way, the image appears on the paper. Ortiz Echagüe became a master of this method and offered a comprehensive explanation in 2 of the numbers of the extinct magazine Progreso Fotográfico. And as it can be imagined, carbon printing is a complex procedure that requires excellence, dexterity, patience, dedication, finesse in the manipulation of materials, and a fine eye for detail. Ortiz Echagüe would practice direct carbon procedures consistently throughout his life, always in black and white, drawn by its artisan hallmark, the richness of tonalities and the freedom of working directly on the pigment. He declared, "With carbon, some control can be exercised by accentuating the transparency of the shadows or strengthening or attenuating the intensity of blacks and whites to achieve a harmony in the image far superior to that which can be achieved with other systematic registration methods." Indeed, direct carbon is perhaps one of the least photographic methods, both for the genre of its brutal manipulations and for the almost limitless freedom it leaves to personal interpretation. His style and mastery are widely recognized both in the past and now. Ortiz Echagüe received numerous awards during his lifetime and enjoyed international recognition from early stages of his photographic career. Together with his singular technique, his photographic method encompasses other fundamental ideas that can be traced back to his first years as aviator in North Africa. First, the portrayal of the unaltered local reality, the rural life, its inhabitants, the customs and the ways of life. He firmly believed that the most important thing for an artist resides in a determination to make contact with people in their native settings, follow the customs, observe them, and try to capture them in their own environment. For the elaboration of these shots, Ortiz Echagüe, as if he was a scenographer, would carefully compose the image. He asked the locals, dressed in his traditional costumes, to strike a classical pose. He then blurred the background to confer the model with a sculpture-inspired prominence, where his clothes, gestures, and movements stand out. Second, Ortiz Echagüe cared deeply for the subject matter, the beauty of the composition, the harmony of the lighting, the shapelessness of the figures, and the movement of the scene. These can only be rooted in a comprehensive observation ability and a trained eye for judgment, in which he excelled. We can see here already some traits of theatricality and scenography and dance and movement. His photographic output was gathered in 4 books that Ortiz Echagüe carefully compiled. Printed first in Germany and translated into Spanish the following year, España Tipos y Trajes is his first book, a compilation of costumes from Castilla, Aragon, Andalucía, Asturias, and País Vasco, summing up to more than 80 photographs or portraits, organized by location, trade, or situation. However, subsequent extended editions followed, summing up to more than 250 portraits or scenes. In this second book, he turned his attention to the architectural and historical Spanish heritage and focused on the villages and landscapes, inspired by the rich variety of sceneries, unique monuments, and picturesque locations, but also castles and fortresses on top of hills, which reveal the contrasts of the former Spanish grandeur, now mostly in ruins and abandoned. Ortiz Echagüe never put aside his thirst for knowing and portraying the Spanish people, habits and customs, and configured a 4th series around the Spanish religious traditions. His 5th and last series was dedicated to the people of the reef. In the 1960s, he returned to North Africa to continue photographing these scenes, as he had been doing in the early years of the century. Some of his most famous images belong to this endeavor, such as Sirocco in el Sahara, though this series was left unfinished, and its book never saw the light in Ortiz Echagüe's lifetime. These tend to be his last photographs, as he abandoned his activities as photographer in 1968. The vast photographic output of José Ortiz Echagüe was bequeathed to the University of Navarra in 1981 and constitutes the essence of the museum's Universidad de Navarra's photographic archive. This donation consists of more than 1,000 carbon-positive pictures and uncountable negatives, and it encompasses photographs from all the thematic groups that the author himself developed in his prosperous career. The collection led to the creation of a permanent exhibition space at the Moon in 2007. Since the inauguration of this space, the legacy of Ortiz Echagüe has gained a renewed and strong voice. His photographs, his artistic vision, his craftsmanship, his ability to capture the depth of human souls, his portrayal of an old way of life, and the beauty of his works have directly influenced and articulated many of other artistic initiatives held at Moon. Its impact has been exceptional in the field of contemporary dance. In the last 4 years, Moon has commissioned, produced, and hosted 4 dance productions directly inspired in Ortiz Echagüe's photographs. These are Atlas, Map of Movements, Transmutación, Hoy y Mañana Son Ayer, specifically inspired in the photographs of Las Roncalesas, and Desde la Ternura, inspired in this photograph called La Ternura. Moreover, José Ortiz Echagüe's influence has also been tangible beyond Moon's sphere. His photographic recollection of Spanish costumes was a direct inspiration for the costume design of Electra, produced by the National Ballet Company. The timelessness and relevance of Ortiz Echagüe's photograph is manifested by the influence in the arts at present. As this list of works showcases, his meaningful and expressive portrayals of the Spanish and African identities constitute a never-ending source of creativity, insight, and reflection. To that effect, the importance of preserving Ortiz Echagüe's legacy and translate it into novel artistic conceptions has become one of the priorities of Museo Universidad de Navarra. One of the goals of this research is revealing and mapping the connections between the photographic output of Ortiz Echagüe and these 5 dance productions. And in this quest, some of the first questions that arise are fundamental and unavoidable. How can still image inspire movement? How do static photographs become dance creations? How can creators transform 2-dimensional realities into 3-dimensional performances? Susan Sontag, in her book on photography, offers the key to understanding the real nature of photography. Each still photograph is a privileged moment, turned into a slim object that one can keep and look again, she says. Indeed, a photograph captures an instant, a brief lapse of time and space, a series of stills. A photograph has the power of stopping the passing of time. It freezes the motion and preserves that moment beyond the reality to which it originally belonged. For the purpose of this research, I recently had the chance to converse with choreographer Daniel Abreu about La Ternura, José Ortiz Echagüe, artistic creativity, and his upcoming production Desde la Ternura. On this matter of movement, he stated that this image was preceded by a movement and was followed by one. Where does this moment come from? What are they doing? What is it going to happen? Where do they go? Evidently, this photograph has a story. Those questions open up a whole world, and from them I can build one. As we understand this intrinsic quality of photography, we must parallel it with its reversed process. As we observe a photograph, we must acknowledge that it was originally embedded in a specific reality, its own time and space, its own story. It is up to the observers to fill in the blanks in their minds, as it is only then that they will grasp the full scope of that photographic image. The photographic process changes 3 different and interdependent steps: the selection of the event to capture, the action of taking the photograph in itself, and its materialization by the observer's approach. The 3 are irreducible. Without an act of interpretation, the previous acts are inane. It is in the act of interpretation where contemporary artistic creators come into play. However, an image tends to hide more than it reveals. Even the so-called realistic photography can open up a wide gap in the understanding of its broader frame, and so often we might find ourselves trying to decipher the image, incited to daydreaming, letting our imagination and creativity run free in search for such understanding. The resolved belief that there is a reality to be unveiled and interpreted is one of the creative drives of the previously mentioned choreographers, and as we have discussed, the output of Ortiz Echagüe agrees firmly with these thoughts. The image belongs then so much to its maker as it is to its interpreter, becoming part of the cultural world and imaginary horizon of them both. Consequently, the interpretation of the photographed still reality and its conversion back to movement is a necessary one but a personal one. But since the image still does not present a factual temporal succession, but only a suggestion of gestures, what concerns the choreographers in their creative processes is to identify in the image the elements that reveal the existence of the diegetic space in it and recreate it. The gestures, the expressions, the skin, the body language, the postures, the attitudes, the lights, the scene, the angles, the costumes, the objects, etc. The possibility of analyzing the fixed image from a theory of the story becomes central in the work. Each reconstruction is shaped by a personal and empathic relationship with the image itself, an openness to the suggestion of movement, and the search for sense in the captured gesture. In this process, each choreographer projects his own experiential understanding of the body in motion and the knowledge of their own body into that of the body they are looking at. So at this point of the speech, we realize that the roles of Ortiz, Echagüe and the choreographers are closer than we might have foreseen. If the producer of the image is an interpreter of time, then the interpreter of the image is also a producer of its meaning. Referring again to my conversation with Daniel Abreu, and when being asked about his personal approach to the interpretation of José Ortiz Echagüe's photograph, he affirmed, "I don't like to transcribe the photographs. I don't want the spectator to see this caption. That Ortiz Echagüe did wonderfully. It is about how can I project this work from my own eyes and view. I want to talk about gesture, the understanding between them, the roughness of their small gestures. For me, what is important is to reveal the narrative of the work itself. This photograph is somehow incomplete. I can fill in the blanks of the narrative with what I want to see in it, with elements of my own story, my own intuition. And for the same reason, ultimately, the spectator is the new narrator, because my interpretation is not a definite version of the story. My interpretation is just my own. The spectator will become the narrator of his own interpretation. It is as if the process of creating and interpreting will begin again, and the spectator would have to be its new voice." The costumes and customs that Ortiz Echagüe depicted might have already been lost, but the information that they provide about the human relationship with the world is a perennial matter. When an image is valuable to us, it is because in it there is something more than the basic record of the event. They mobilize a poetic value, question an ethical sense, pose an existential urgency. And so do Ortiz Echagüe's photographs. These meaningful glimpses into reality are the example of an inherently inseparable connection between self and world. Museo Universidad de Navarra understands the malleability of this self-world connection, the importance of constantly redefining it as a vehicle for self-understanding, and the personal and artistic gain that it provides. That is why they continue to commission works inspired in José Ortiz Echagüe's work.
Thank you all for your attention. We will be expanding further on some of the key matters in the written dissertation, but for now, I am looking forward to answering your questions and interacting with you. Thank you very much.